Good day, modern world history. My name is Mr. Aguilar. I have the pleasure of being able to teach you the fourth stage of the French Revolution. I know you're preparing for a presentation in front of your class. Hopefully, this little presentation will give you everything you need to know. Just as a reminder, the main things we need to have for our classmates are definitions and understandings, being able to teach these six key concepts: the Napoleonic Code, La Confédération du Rhin, the Continental System, the Brumaire Coup, the Battle of Austerlitz, and the 100 Days. You have a bit of a challenge in that you have the fourth stage of the French Revolution, so you have to have a general background understanding of how you got here, which you unfortunately don't have, which I'll help you out with. So that kind of sucks. But you have the coolest stage, in my opinion. So let's get that underway. So, like I just said, we're going to review the previous three stages that you'll hear good presentations from your peers on. Then we're going to look at the fourth stage in three steps because it's all about Napoleon. One of my favorite, I shouldn't say favorite, one of the most interesting figures in history to me. So, first off, the first three stages of the revolution. I'm sure your teachers probably went over this already, kind of in the five W's. But basically, there's this one historian, Crane, or Mr. Britain, I guess, back in the day, who said revolutions tend to go through these four stages: moderate, radical, Thermidorian, and restoration. And he said this because the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution and other famous revolutions in history went through these stages. You don't have to agree with this guy because there are limits in this model, as there are limits in all models, but overall it works pretty well for the French Revolution. Other than depending on what you think of this last stage, which is going to be the key topic of your presentation, the main idea that wraps everything together. But let's just first review the first three phases. So first off, there's going to be a moderate period in revolutions when people are trying to create massive change in society, right? Usually they'll try to do this through like legal means. They will try to make change slowly but still effectively. So, for example, the big things during this stage, which your peers will talk about, is the creation of a constitutional monarchy, basically making sure the king of France didn't have unlimited power. They also created a new government, like institution called the National Assembly, which kind of ran things for France using all people from all different walks of life in France instead of just the wealthy. And the three estate system, I won't tell you what that is, just make sure you pay attention for that for your other peers, was abolished, right? After that period, you tend to have radical periods in the French Revolution, but also revolutions across history. People get kind of fed up with how slow things are going in their moderate stage or period, and they start to do some crazy things. In this period, this is where you get the very cinematic, dramatic time period of the French Revolution. If you've ever seen, like, I don't know, any movies or anything on the French Revolution, this is the one they like to talk about a lot because it's very crazy. This is where people's heads get chopped off. This is where people have to obey laws. There's like a reign of terror. You have Maximilian Robespierre change the government, kind of become a dictator, and everyone's very scared of him. Rule through fear. Also, random things change in this time period, which aren't even related to like the government. This is where a bunch of crazy things happen in France. So I'd say whoever gets to present group two or stage two also will have a lot of fun. So pay attention to them. But basically, France is going through a lot of turmoil because there's a very radical people in charge of their country. The stage before yours, though, is the Thermidorian period. People in this stage kind of get fed up with the whole, crazy crap happening and stability kind of diminishing because there are people with very radical ideas in charge. So we see an oligarchy, so a small group of people try to maintain control of the country and try to restore stability, but usually they ultimately fail, and then they turn to the strongman or the restoration period or an enlightened despot or basically like an autocrat, which is Napoleon, which let's talk about him now. So, first off, who is Napoleon? Napoleon was a guy from Corsica, so it was a new territory of the French Empire about a year before he was born. France purchased Corsica, so he was barely French, if you could think about it that way. He always had an accent throughout his entire life. He was always seen as an outsider, so he kind of felt the need to prove himself as like a loyal person in his country. He does this dramatically in something known as the Battle of Rivoli, which someone in the Thermidorian period will probably cover. France was getting invaded by a bunch of different countries, mostly because there were other countries in Europe were not very happy with the idea of France overthrowing their monarch. France even kills their monarch. Spoiler alert for a radical period group. And the different monarchies of Europe, because Europe is ruled by kings and queens during this time period, are kind of scared that people in their country will do the same to them. So to stop this crazy revolutionary ideas coming out of France from their perspective, they all invade France. But Napoleon, a very skilled military general, is able to save France from invasion at the Battle of Rivoli. And he wins the War of the First Coalition, so he obviously becomes a pretty popular dude. Some other things happen which I wish I had more time for, but I am trying to keep this kind of short. But Napoleon, because he's really famous, really popular, and a little bit power hungry, he decides to take in charge of his nation. In his defense, I guess you could say he also thinks his government is rather ineffective, but, doing a coup might be a bit of a dramatic response to not really trusting your government. I mean, I don't know. Matter of opinion, I guess. But yeah, so he takes over his country in something known as the Brumaire coup. So originally, he partners up with 3 dudes to try to become in charge of France, and the 3 of them will rule France together. But he kind of gets rid of them, and he does have a constitution in his defense, or a law in his defense, where he lets people vote. He says, hey, everyone, do you want me to be in charge of France for the rest of my life? Yes or no? And he says that 99% of France said yes, so he was technically elected to be dictator, so there's a little bit of a democratic element to that, I guess. But people went through the records, and he only won 82% of the votes, which is still a lot, and you got to realize he's like a massive hero in this country because he saved them from invasion, which will obviously make you a pretty big hero. But he did lie about the election results in the Brumaire coup, which is the first thing you need to talk about. So yeah, the Brumaire coup itself is him taking power by force with his 2 friends and overthrowing the Directory, the previous government in charge in stage 3. But yeah, you can also say it also kind of talks about his consolidation of power, where he says in the 1800 election, I believe, hey, am I allowed to be dictator for life? And 82% of France said yes. He lied about it, saying 99%, but now he's dictator for life for France. So we'll see how that goes for him. The other big thing when he's in charge of France is he creates something known as the Napoleonic Code, where he treats all citizens equally before the law, which was not a thing in the previous time periods in France. I talked about, or other groupmates will talk about, the 3 estates. You should already kind of know about that from the 5 W's lesson. But basically, the 3 estates, there's the nobility, there's the clergy, and there's the everyone else, aka peasants usually, right? Peasants get treated worse, nobility gets treated pretty good, clergy gets treated pretty good. Napoleon's like, forget that, everyone should be treated equally before the law, so he creates this law code, and it kind of codifies equality before the law. For French citizens, note that though. So were women allowed to be citizens back in the day? No. So the Napoleonic Code didn't treat women equally, which is obviously a big deal. However, it did treat like other French citizens equally, so that's kind of good, I guess, right? Now, Napoleon goes a little bit overboard in the eyes of many European monarchs because Napoleon's kind of sad for various reasons, that he's just a guy, he's just a general, he's not anything special. I guess he's a dictator, which is kind of cool to him, I guess. So he decides to crown himself emperor. He even invades Italy, finds the Pope, captures the Pope, and then makes the Pope a part of his little famous ceremony, because back in the day you needed the Pope to make yourself emperor. But famously in the ceremony, the Pope is about to crown him emperor, and he snatches the crown from the Pope and puts the crown on his own head, saying, hey, I'm that guy. I don't need a religious person to make me emperor. I'm a self-made man, unlike all the other monarchs of Europe. I'm him, basically, right? And everyone obviously gets kind of mad at Napoleon for doing that. So they say, let's try to defeat Napoleon again. So he's able to crush them again at something we'll talk about in a bit. But yeah, so now France is at war again. I guess one thing I forgot to say is when he makes himself dictator for life before he makes himself emperor, Europe again invades France, but Napoleon wins again. So he's obviously super duper popular, and that popularity is able to gain him that ability to declare himself emperor, and everyone is pretty happy about it in France, relatively. So yes, what I was referring to. Everyone in Europe is kind of pissed at Napoleon for saying, I'm emperor. They're like, no one can just declare themselves king. You got to be special, and you're not special, Napoleon. So they invade France again, but he defeats the enemies of France at the famous Battle of Austerlitz, known as the Battle of the Three Emperors. It's the French Emperor versus the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and the Emperor of the Russian Empire. It's the Holy Roman Empire and the Russian Empire versus France. But Napoleon, against overwhelming odds, defeats this coalition. He dismantles the Holy Roman Empire, which we'll talk about in a bit. And yeah, he's awesome, militarily speaking. And then they try it again, they being the enemies of France, with the War of the Fourth Coalition, but Napoleon again defeats them. He's a military mastermind. Good job, Napoleon. However, as Napoleon just basically defeats all of his enemies, even though they all gang up on him, he is now the master of Europe. And as master of Europe, he creates something known as La Confédération du Rhin, which is one of your key vocabulary words. And this vocabulary word basically says that Napoleon took the Holy Roman Empire, so kind of like olden day Germany plus some extra bits. Because he defeated them, he takes over this territory and basically makes them loyal to him. And to ensure their loyalty, yes, he uses some German princesses and princes and just says, like, basically swear loyalty to me. But a lot of these places, he decides to make his siblings in charge of. So most famously, his brother, Jerome, he said, hey, you're now king of Westphalia. Good job, you. And even in other places that are outside of the Holy Roman Empire, such as Italy or Holland or the Netherlands, he decides to put his other brothers and sisters as leaders of those places. So he's like, Louis, you're now King Louis of Holland. You're welcome. Little sister, Elisa, you're now Princess of Tuscany, which is a part of Italy. I got you. So this is making a lot of people kind of mad because Napoleon's a bit like nepotism, which is like where relations kind of get you positions of power. And so all of his siblings are becoming in charge of Europe, not because they're like good at anything, but because they're related to Napoleon. So that's kind of grimy to a lot of people. And also people in Holland, people in Germany, people in Italy probably aren't very happy that non-natives are ruling their country, right? So yeah, that was the La Confédération du Rhin. Another thing Napoleon decides to do now that he's in charge of basically all of mainland Europe is create something known as the continental system. Basically, long story short, prohibit trade with Britain. Not just France doesn't trade with Britain, the UK, but everyone is not allowed to trade with the UK. Everyone in Europe, that is. Why does he do this? It's because the British are the ones who keep financing like wars against Napoleon. They're the ones who pay off all of the people to attack Napoleon. And he's not really happy with that. So he says, well, if no one trades with them, won't they become poor? Kind of. But the problem is if you don't trade with the UK, you being a European country, you'll also kind of become poor as well. So a lot of countries are facing a lot of economic damages, such as Portugal, such as Russia. So these places revolt and rebel against this whole Napoleon trying to implement the continental system. So famously, Napoleon invades Portugal, but then just decides to invade Spain for other reasons. But there's a lot of rebels. So Napoleon's bogged down fighting in Spain, trying to maintain the continental system. And then most famously, Russia also disobeys the continental system. And Napoleon says, hey, I beat you twice, so why can't I beat you again? And he invades with the largest army at that point in history in Russia. But we all know how that ends, right? This is the biggest military defeat in history. And Napoleon marches in with 600,000 people, and he only comes back with 100,000. So he only had a 1 in 6 chance to survive this disastrous war for France. And now Napoleon is on the back foot. We only have 1 more minute. I'm sorry, I tried to go really fast, but you have a lot of information to go over, and I had to review, which took me 5 minutes, everything before, just so you understood what was happening. So we'll make this a part 1 and part 2 video. So this is part 1. You kind of know now how Napoleon rose to power and how Napoleon fell from power. I'll just do a quick review of your main topics, right? So Brumaire coup is when Napoleon becomes in power. He uses the military to take over. Yes, he has an election, but it's kind of a shady election. The Napoleonic Code is when Napoleon is in charge of his country and creates laws that put all French people equal before the law, or I should say French citizens. Sorry, ladies. Also, the Battle of Austerlitz is when Napoleon's military dominance enables him to take over all of Europe. And we have La Confédération du Rhin, where he creates a system of puppet states in charge of Europe, but under French control. See you in the next vid. Bye-bye.